Welcome in, college baseball fans. Back with another episode of the ACC preview. Got part two here. Going to be running through Georgia Tech, Boston College here. These are our 12 and 11 seeds. Notre Dame, Pitt in the last episode. So if you didn't get a chance to check that out, we're going to have links into that so you can kind of get caught up to speed. Monty, how we feeling today?
I'm feeling pretty good, ready to get into this deep dive on these two great programs. Did we have them seated in our rankings as the 12 and 11, or because I know I didn't when I set up the schedule? Like for instance, next week we do Virginia and Virginia Tech, and those are not the 9 and 10 seeds necessarily. So
I thought we did have them as the seeds, but I'll double check that.
Okay,
but again, this is kind of. It feels like we're still kind of in that quote unquote bottom tier of the ACC.
Right.
While Boston College did kind of have that big jump, and Georgia Tech's hosted a regional, these do kind of feel a lot closer to Pitt and Notre Dame than they do to kind of the top brass. Let's go ahead and jump into it. Georgia Tech's led by none other than Danny Hall in his 31st year at Georgia Tech, longest tenured coach in ACC history, just inducted into the Hall of Fame, truly one of the legends of ACC baseball. He returns a team with a bunch of question marks this year. Last year they went 30 and 27, finished 12 and 18 in ACC play, 2 and Q at the ACC tournament, one series over Clemson and Duke, which I think at the time they really weren't big wins, but they kind of turned into big wins down the stretch. And then they were on the bubble heading into May, kind of flustered down the stretch, going 4 and 9. Monty, why don't you walk us through kind of some of their key departures and names they look to replace?
So they had arguably, I think, the best outfield in the ACC last year. You have Jake DeLeo, Angelo Despignia, and Stephen Reed. All those guys, they played every single game. They all hit 340 or better. Jake DeLeo had 23 doubles. Reed had 13. Despignia had 12. And then they all had 14 or more home runs. These three guys were absolutely critical. DeLeo and Despignia, they're off to the pros. Nobody really knows what happened to Stephen Reed. He entered the transfer portal. I've done some searching. No idea where he's ended up. Hopefully he's okay. And then they lose Christian Campbell, who is a draft-eligible redshirt freshman, another big loss. And then Drew Compton, though he was injured a lot of last season, he is gone. He was a big part of that 2022 team that made the NCAA tournament. And then, of course, you lose the two-way star in Jackson Finley, who was really instrumental as an offensive piece, kind of rough-edged on the mound, and some other key offensive pieces. Not much lost in the pitching department, though.
Yeah, I mean, they were one of the more exciting teams in the ACC, and they reminded me a ton of Louisville, where you almost kind of felt like they were playing down to a lot of the teams around them. I mean, they had a ton of talent in the outfield, and they seemed to always get the hits, but they always seemed to be one or two kind of at-bats away. But again, there's a lot of unknowns with this Georgia Tech team. And when you look up and down this roster, as we kind of jump into that next point, I mean, there's only 3 guys that started over 45 games for them. Peyton Green at shortstop started 55. There is a ton of fresh faces. They have a ton of freshmen recruiting as well, a ton of transfers.
And Peyton Green started those 55 games in Raleigh for NC State.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, again, so a fresh face for Georgia Tech, but again, not a fresh in terms of what you're going to see from production. John Gressler, the senior, he started 47 games at first base. Most of them, I believe, were DHing. But again, let's go ahead and jump into kind of our projected lineup. Behind the plate, we got Tyler Minnick, started 27 games from last year, hit 263 from the right side. Really going to provide kind of a young spark behind the plate as he's only a sophomore.
Yeah, he was a big time recruit. Got a lot of playing time last year, despite not necessarily being the number one catcher. And he's got some pop. He's probably the job is his to lose, despite them bringing in Matthew Ellis, who is a transfer from Indiana. Matthew Ellis was basically the backup in Indiana last year. He only had 25 games played. He brings experience to kind of push Tyler Minnick and give them some depth ahead of those two freshmen, Aiden Jolly and Vaughn Lackey. But
Vaughn Lackey was a pretty good get for Georgia Tech, if I remember correctly, too, as well. He was kind of a prized recruit. So he's another guy that could kind of be in the mix again, that has the talent to kind of push Minnick behind the plate. But again, it is minutes to lose. He hit 263. You know what you're going to get behind the plate with him, and he kind of commands the pitching zone as well. Kind of more of a defensive guy.
Yeah, and this is and when we talk about Georgia Tech, we're going to be talking a lot about those fresh faces. I believe Perfect Game just came out. They're the number 8 freshman recruiting class. So this is a very strong unknown lineup because of all these freshmen. But once we get into it, there's Von Lackey's just the start.
Yeah, and I mean that's kind of one of the crazy things that we've seen with college baseball. I mean, with the COVID year and all of the transfers, this Georgia Tech team does kind of feel like a little bit of a throwback team that you're going to kind of grow with this team and kind of have some of those growing pains. But kind of the senior leader over there, John Gressler at first base, started 47 games for him, hit 333, 13 doubles, 8 home runs, 37 RBIs. He's going to kind of be the guy that Coach Hall kind of relies on to be the veteran presence in that lineup.
Yeah, and they're looking for a lot of great things from Peyton Green. Peyton Green had a little bit of an interesting season at NC State last year. He got off to a really good start, was the team's best hitter early in the season, and then they moved him to second base, and his offensive prowess kind of dropped off after that. And he's back at his natural position of shortstop, fresh start in Georgia Tech, big-time guy. He started all 57 games as a freshman at NC State and then 43 games last year, 55 games last year. And so he brings a lot of experience as well. And we can't necessarily disregard Mike Bacchetti either, who is a transfer from Fairfield, bringing a ton of experience in that regard as well.
Yeah, Mike Bacchetti, he's going to be kind of the prototypical second baseman. Probably doesn't have the arm strength to play other spots in the infield. But again, he's going to provide a bat that's going to hit over 300. He's going to be getting on base. He was a really big get as the Fairfield transfer. And that's one thing to kind of track with this Georgia Tech team with him is kind of how he makes that jump up to the next level. Because, I mean, Fairfield's played in some pretty big games. They made the tournament a few times. So he's kind of been there, done that as this Georgia Tech team kind of tries to take that next step.
Yeah, and while we're still kind of looking over at the right side of the infield, Karsten Sabathia, the name sounds familiar. It's CC Sabathia's son. No, he's not a pitcher. He's a first baseman. He's got a lot of raw power. He probably won't take Geisler's spot at first base, but he should get a lot of looks at DH with that powerful bat of his.
Yeah, that's the one thing that I think Georgia Tech's going to have a little bit of a challenge is they have some of these talented people behind the plate. You have Gessler at first, then obviously Sabathia. Kind of how Coach Hall wants to play that catcher, first base, DH platoon because he has a ton of options, but he doesn't have a lot of experience at those options. So kind of getting those guys at bats throughout the year, kind of in the midweeks, see who kind of earns it. I think that's going to be something to track is kind of those 3 spots. And again, you touched on Peyton Green. He's going to be the headliner name, probably going to bat 2 or 3 in this order. Again, got great pop. And then at third base, we're going to have a fresh face there. Ryan Jaros, freshman, number 6 third baseman in the country by perfect game. Really big get by Georgia Tech to get him to stay home. And he kind of seems to be the favorite over there at third base.
Yeah, he is a future middle of the order bat. He's your prototypical big bodied third baseman, 6'4", 220. He's got a lot of pop. I really like him at third base. And with all we're going to talk about him in a second, but with a lot of the spotlight on Drew Burris, Ryan Jaros is going a little bit under the radar, and he could be the bigger impact freshman than the center fielder, but it's a big get for him. And then you've got another freshman, Carson Kearse, who can play across the infield. He was in the third base mix, and then you have returning two-way player Dimitri Diamant, adding some depth there at those positions as well.
Yeah, Carson Kearse was a really big get, and you were kind of curious when they signed somebody like Jaros if Carson Kearse was going to stay at Georgia Tech or try and transfer elsewhere. Because, again, he does have a talent to play in the ACC as a freshman. So kind of watching Jaros and Kearse battle it out, I think the cream's going to rise to the top between those. But, again, Ryan Jaros just feels like an ACC baseball player. He's got the size. He really doesn't need to work into his frame, and he's got a very, very fluid swing from the right side of the plate.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'm a big fan of Ryan Jaros. I'm really looking forward to seeing all these freshmen play at Georgia Tech, and that's where it's kind of hard to kind of pin Georgia Tech down in the ACC. Is in theory with what they've lost and how bad their pitching was last year, you would have thought that they'd be down near the bottom, but with what they've brought in is really impressive. So they've got a chance to finish higher than what we potentially think based on what they get out of these new faces.
And again, new faces in the outfield is going to be a big theme here. Drew Burris in center field, you touched on. He's kind of the big get for them. Really kind of a prototypical center fielder. I think I saw that he ran like a 7.160 at perfect game. Really fluid swing from the right side. He's going to be at center field for them.
You know who he reminds me of is because he's 5'9", he's a little bit on the smaller side, but he reminds me a lot of Drew Gilbert over at Tennessee. With the way he plays and the way he swings. And obviously that's not a terrible comparison. Gilbert went in the first round, is a pretty big prospect, I think, for the Mets now. But I really like the way that, he's only 5'9", but he's got some pop and the bat swing is impressive. Bat speed, excuse me.
I was going to go, I think it's Sam Foyd, the A's outfielder from a few years back. He was going to be my kind of comparison. He almost feels like a lefty bat with how he plays the game kind of in center field, but he is on the right side of there. He's probably going to be the starting center fielder from day one, which again, 2 freshmen, that's going to be a big thing for Georgia Tech to tackle. But again, on the right side, we got Bobby. I know I'm going to butcher this. If you want to give it a try first, Monty.
Zmarzlak, that's what I'm going. No, I'm not sure at all. I know he played a bunch for Maryland last year. And this was a pretty big get in the transfer portal for Georgia Tech. I love the guys they've got in the outfield here. And an underrated one is Cam Jones, who's going to play. He's a two-way guy, but he is going to probably be, I would imagine, be the leadoff guy. He stole 37 bases last year for Georgia State, hit 336, an absolute monster out there for the Yellow Jackets.
Another name to watch is Parker Brosius, the sophomore. That's who we're projecting to kind of start in the outfield there. Had kind of a bigger sample size than a lot of guys on Georgia Tech, but again, hit under 200, only had 11 at-bats, kind of used more of as a defensive replacement. And then Trey Younger, the Wofford transfer senior, started 58 games, hit over 360. That's going to be a battle to watch kind of between those two guys.
And he stole 26 bases as well. So we're looking at, they brought in some speed in Trey Younger and Cam Jones on the base pass. Could be indicative of Coach Hall wanting to run a little bit more than he has in the last couple of years.
Yeah, and as we kind of look up and down this lineup, this feels like a modern college baseball team. There's a ton of stud freshmen that have the chance to start right off the bat. They have a ton of guys with pop. They have a ton of guys with speed, a ton of depth. I'm really excited to watch Georgia Tech kind of in these early season matchups because, again, you don't know what lineup Coach Hall is going to go with. He's going to kind of be fluid, go through a few other things, and kind of when they roll into ACC play, I think we're going to see a lineup that kind of sticks where you'll see the same 9 guys up and down through ACC play.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be a little bit different Georgia Tech team than Georgia Tech of the last couple of years. The last couple of years, Georgia Tech, even when they made the tournament, these were slugging teams with poor pitching. So it was very interesting to watch Georgia Tech pound the baseball and just basically outscore teams. They're not necessarily going to have that capability with this roster, at least not yet. But they have a very strong lineup that I really like. But it's just a matter of whether they can get the pitching going. And I think that we're going to see them run the bases a little bit more than they have in years past, trying to manufacture more runs rather than relying on the home run ball.
Yeah, and that has been kind of their Achilles heel, as we've seen in tournament time, is sometimes their bats go cold, like we saw in that Auburn regional or back in Tennessee. But again, as we kind of go through this pitching staff, Ben King's going to be the big headliner on there. Had 25 appearances for him. Redshirt junior. I know he was kind of on the fringe of getting drafted or coming back. He had a 3.73 ERA. Cam Hill is going to be another name to watch for them. Cape Cod pitcher of the year, had 18 appearances. The ERA is a little bit higher, but again, he was the Cape Cod pitcher of the year. I think he's going to be a guy that they lean on heavy. And then Aiden Finateri, I think is how you pronounce it. That's going to be the guy who we're projecting to be their Sunday guy. Had 3 appearances for him, started 4 games, had a 4.64 ERA. Those are going to be the 3 names that we kind of watch out for Georgia Tech.
So Terry Buss, who was the closer last year, is projected to be their Friday night starter with Ben King sliding into that closer role. But what a summer Cameron Hill had in Cape Cod League. Absolutely dominant. I watched a couple of his starts. He was fantastic. Hopefully he can take that success and bring it back to Atlanta and really give them something, because if they can get these two or three guys along with Ben King out of the bullpen going, they're looking a lot better than the past, and their pitching could finally give them something here in the ACC that they haven't seen in the last couple of years.
Yeah, and I know that that's kind of been a theme with a lot of these ACC teams, is that, the pitching depth isn't there. It feels like Georgia Tech doesn't have that problem. They have a lot of guys that, started at other D1s. They have Florida State transfers, Georgia State transfers, South Carolina transfer. But again, a lot of these guys haven't had the full season workload that we've seen in the past. So kind of how they handle that, how Georgia Tech manages their workloads, I think those are going to be the things to watch out for with this staff, because again, they do have the staff to kind of be in the upper echelon of the ACC if everybody kind of plays up to their talent standard.
Oh yeah, and if I'm circling one guy in the bullpen that I'm really looking forward to seeing, it's Michael Kovala from the Czech Republic. He pitched in the World Baseball Classic, if you recall, and looked really good. And he is now here on campus at Georgia Tech. I think he was dealing with an injury in the fall that he's come back from, but I'm really excited to see him pitch again. I'm trying to remember who he faced in the World Baseball Classic, but I remember being really impressed and trying to remember that he would be on campus 2024.
I want to say they fell into that Venezuela kind of regional in the World Baseball Classic, if my memory kind of serves me correct.
They were out towards Asia, actually. They were, I want to say they were playing Chinese Taipei.
Let me see. As my slow internet loads up. That's the great thing about the internet now, is that you never have to speculate.
Yeah, but
Japan, they were Japan, Korea, Australia.
Yeah, so he faced some pretty good hitters, especially if he came into pitch against Japan. Obviously, we know what Japan, they won the gold. So this is a very, very interesting prospect. Obviously, Tate McKee's also a high-end name. So is Jackson Sobel on the left side. You can see, unlike our previous preview show, we have a ton of arms up here, a ton of names that we didn't have as many for in the other ones. And that's kind of because Georgia Tech's got a lot of guys they could go to, and we're not sure who they're going to go to. So we've kind of just thrown every pitcher they've got on their roster up on this on this graphic on the screen here. So you can see everyone they've got. A number of transfers. They got Brett Thomas transferring over from South Carolina, Brett Barfield transferring over from Florida State, Mason Patel from Georgia State, and Cam Jones, who we already discussed as his ability on the in the outfield and on the base pass. He's also a two-way star that can come out of the bullpen and throw some darts.
I'm excited to kind of see how this team kind of handles it. Again, Mason Patel, the senior from Georgia State, he really hasn't logged a ton of innings, but in his very limited stuff, that is kind of where he's exploded onto the scene. And yeah, I mean, the graphic that you can see, it's just loaded up and down with arms. And finally seeing some left-handed pitching. I know in the last show we really kind of lacked that left-handed pitching.
Oh, yeah. They've got lots of options. It'll be interesting to see how they settle. I imagine a lot of the early season games will be experimenting with who's got the stuff, who you can rely on late in games and whatnot. So that early season schedule is going to be really important for the Yellow Jackets.
And as we kind of transition into that ACC schedule and kind of previewing what it's going to look like, I mean, this Georgia Tech non-conference leaves a ton to be desired. Non-conference against Radford, Cornell, Youngstown State. Yeah, they have that big series with Georgia, but again, this isn't the Georgia 3 or 4 years ago. So, I mean, there's a very legitimate chance Georgia Tech rolls in really, really hot into ACC play against NC State, because, I mean, they have a chance to, be at around a 70% winning percentage. I mean, that's a very attainable goal for them.
Yeah, I mean, there's an argument to be made that Northeastern could be their toughest game before ACC play begins, and that's on March 5th. It's a midweek game, so who knows how difficult that'll truly be. But obviously, Georgia State, Georgia Southern, Georgia, those aren't necessarily gimmies, but they're also not world beaters. So, like you said, they could be rolling in high confidence. North Carolina State get out to really good start going into ACC play, which could carry over into that play.
ACC play, they draw North Carolina and UVA. Those are kind of going to be the two big headliners along with Miami. Avoid Wake Forest, avoid Louisville. They do play a series at Clemson. This is kind of a really good slate for Georgia Tech. I mean, if you're going to hand pick who you want to play, I mean, they get to avoid Wake Forest in the ACC. That's always a plus.
Yeah, but the Coastal is so difficult to play because they're going to North Carolina, they're going to Virginia, they're going to Clemson. Those are all really tough road trips. And they've got Duke at home, and then their last series could be against a Florida State team that's really good as they just try to qualify for the ACC tournament, or if they're on the bubble, more than that. So it's a really tough test for them. They've got Auburn a couple of times as well, as usual, where they'll face Auburn in midweek games. Those aren't going to be easy. Auburn's a very, very good baseball team this year. So it's just going to be an interesting season for Georgia Tech.
Also have that midweek with Georgia Southern, which is, a very good up-and-coming team. That's going to be another one that can kind of sneak up on them and, kill their RPI if they drop that game. But, yeah, I mean, the Florida State one, if you were to sit here and tell me at the end of June you get to play Florida State last weekend, I'm sure Georgia Tech would sign up for that. But I think that we're going to see a lot different Florida State team this year, and that's probably going to be a series that decides a lot in terms of tournament play and stuff like that in the ACC.
And it will be in Tallahassee, which is going to be a big deal as well.
I mean, even last year when they were terrible, that was still a tough place to go in and play. Yeah. I mean, they packed that place on Friday nights when I was there, and they were absolutely abysmal. I think it was a record for runs allowed, and the fans kind of stuck it out the whole game. So if they even have just an ounce of success, that place is going to get pretty rocking.
Oh, yeah.
All right, let's go ahead and close the door on Georgia Tech and move over to our next team. Another kind of city team, if you will, Boston College. Boston College was kind of, the darlings of the media last year, kind of came out of nowhere, made only their second regional appearance since 2008. But this is going to be a new Boston College team. New coach, Todd Interdon. You're going to have to help me with the name, Monty.
Interdonato.
Interdonato from Wofford, spent 16 years there, built a fantastic program. Their coach, Coach Gambino, has moved on to Penn State as Penn State kind of invests in their baseball program. Last year, 37-20, 16-14 in the ACC, 1-1 in the ACC tournament, swept North Carolina on the road, beat Tennessee in a midweek. That was kind of everybody's eye-opening experience, as I think it was Tennessee's only second loss, and then UConn on the road. They were the number 2 seed in the Tuscaloosa Regional and lost to Troy in the first game, then won 2 elimination games versus Nichols and Troy before falling to Bama in that regional. Monty, there's a ton of names that are leaving from this, including one of my personal favorites, Travis Honeyman. Who's leaving this Boston College team?
I mean, you mentioned Travis Honeyman. His loss is not as huge as it could have been because he had suffered through injuries, especially towards the end of last season. It's a big loss, but it could have been worse if he's, starting off these games. It forced them to kind of figure out ways to win without him. The big loss, though, is Joe Vetrano, who played in all 56 games, 22 home runs, 64 RBIs, massive, massive bat in the middle of that order. And then they lost a lot of depth on the pitching side. Chris Flynn, who made 16 starts, Henry Leak, who made 11 starts, 18 appearances, and then some Andrew Roman, who was their closer, and then a couple of other guys in big arms in Julian Tagini and Ian Murphy. So big losses there, but I do like a lot of what they're bringing back.
Yeah, I mean, they're probably one of the older teams that we have seen in the ACC, and it almost feels like such a stark contrast between what we just talked about with Georgia Tech. I mean, you look up and down this lineup, they're going to have experience, and it all starts behind the plate with Middlebury College transfer John Collins, who's going to get that fifth-year COVID year, hit 361, which, again, take them with a little bit of a grain of salt as it is D3. 361, 5 doubles, a home, 1 triple, 11 home runs, 40 RBIs. And then Parker Ladewith behind the plate again, another kind of senior to watch out for. Didn't really play a ton, definitely a glove first kind of guy. Nate McHugh and then Blake Milner are going to be the 2 sophomores kind of rounding it out. Blake Milner is the Yale transfer again. So a ton of experience at the top end, and they're going to need everything that they can get with this pitching staff, and it all starts with John Collins.
Yeah, I really like John Collins. I think there's no question that he is going to be the starting catcher for them. He replaces uh, uh, a guy who didn't do a whole lot for um, offensively for Boston College, Peter Burns. He obviously was a defensive stalwart, so I don't want to take anything away from him. But I think John Collins is going to bring a lot more offense than what Peter Burns did, and that's a huge plus for them. My apologies. We have the graphic up for Boston College. I did not get it up for Georgia Tech, but we have fixed the technical issues. My apologies. But yeah, I'm a big fan of John Collins. Beck Milner, I think, actually might be the second guy that gets a chance to play with his experience at Yale. He's got a little bit more offensive upside than, say, Parker Landwehr.
Yeah, but again, John Collins is going to be in this lineup probably starting just about every game, which is almost unheard of as a catcher. But again, I feel like that's how good he is behind the plate. Moving on to first base and kind of that right side, we got Kyle Wolf starting, and then Vince Cimini is a graduate transfer. Kyle Wolf, sophomore, only played in 20 games last year, hit 220. Likely going to need to probably get better if he expects to kind of stay in that lineup. But again, Vince Cimini started 55 games for him, hit 277, 1 home run, 17 RBIs, and was really kind of a glove first guy from him. I think he didn't have very many errors for them. What are you kind of seeing from that right side of the lineup for Boston College? I know, Joe Votero is kind of going to be a big name to replace here.
Yeah, that's going to be the key, is who is replacing him. It looks like Kyle Wolf is going to get the shot. He did make some starts in either DH or in the outfield when I saw him at in the ACC tournament. He's going to get the first crack at it. Otherwise, they're going to turn to Owen DeShazo or Connor Birch. Cimini, he played, I want to say, played a lot at third or short. I think he played a lot of short at the beginning of last year and then moved to second. He can play all across the infield, but based on the other needs, I believe he's going to start at second base. And he's another guy that's got a lot of experience from last year's team. Like we talked about, they lost Joe Vetrano, but they bring back basically everybody else other than Travis Honeyman, who was already kind of replaced during the season last year due to injury. So they bring back a lot of experience, losing only really their catcher and first baseman. So Sam McNulty, Nick Wong, Vince Cimini, all guys that started a lot of games for him last year.
And Sam McNulty, again, is another name where he's kind of not necessarily a glove first guy, but he's just so sure-handed up the middle that he almost feels like a glove first guy. You forget that he hit 286 last year for him. And again, for somebody like Hartzell and Garcia to kind of learn behind Wang and McNulty, I think that's going to provide them a lot of benefit too as well. But again, Wang and McNulty are going to be kind of the stalwarts in this side of the offense. And they're going to be big middle of the order guys too for BC as well.
Yeah, and Hartzell and Garcia are two guys. They're listed here on the graphic as shortstop and third base, but they can play across the infield. So don't necessarily think they're pigeonholed in at third base and shortstop. They can play second base, shortstop, third base. They're very talented freshmen. It's just going to be hard for them to push for playing time behind these experienced vets.
Both of them are left-handed bats too, so that might be something to track as well, as we've kind of seen, more teams kind of move to this platoon aspect if they do kind of get some of those lefty at bats, because again, they have the talent to warrant those at bats as well. Then in the outfield, we got Parker Roche, another senior. It's going to be a common theme with this team. Barry Walsh, the graduate, and then Cam Leary out there in right as another senior for him. Again, I think Cam Leary is kind of the name that quickly jumps off the fact. I mean, he's flashed at times and been a very talented hitter. And again, the arm strength's a big thing for Cam Leary. But how does he kind of transition as now he's not the filler for Travis Honeyman? He is the guy out there, right? I think Cam Leary's kind of going to be a big name to watch for this Boston College team.
Well, it's interesting. I think he's going to end up DHing a lot more, and Cole Mercado is going to start and right. But Cam Leary was suffering through some injuries last year as well, but he's got the most power left in this lineup. He's hit 26 home runs over the last two seasons, despite battling those injuries last year. So he's probably going to be one of your big power bats. He does have some strikeout issues, though. So if he can work on that a little bit, that'll help. But Cole Mercado is a very talented, had a very talented freshman year last year, and should probably get the nod in right because he's just a little bit better defensively than Cam Leary, and then take a little bit of heat off Cam Leary with the injuries. But the guy I'm circling in the outfield and who I love is Barry Walsh. This is a very good defensive outfielder, but he really came into his own last season offensively and hit over 300, has some power. He's really going to anchor this lineup, I think, and really take them places.
Yeah, I'm excited to see kind of where his bat takes him this year. And then kind of the speed aspect, too. Still 12 of 13 bases. Is kind of a dying thing in the ACC. But Patrick Roche out there at left, I think he's another name to really kind of watch for BC2 as well. Graduate again, very old guy, hit 294. So he's kind of going to be not necessarily a filler bat, but he's going to be middle, bottom of the order kind of guy, which again, if you have him as the depth at that spot and he gives you 300 plus batting again, I think that's going to be bode well for this Boston College team.
And Cam Carraher making the jump from D2. This is a guy who hit 337, had 14 home runs, but also stole 34 bases. And something that Todd Donato liked to do at Wofford was run the base pass. So you're going to see Boston College, I think, run a little bit more. And just looking at the outfield, a lot of that speed's going to come from the outfield. Walsh had 14 stolen bases last year. Mercado had 10. Leary had 12 despite the injuries. So you're going to see a lot of base running in Boston College with the new coach here as they have a little bit of a change in philosophy there. But I really like this outfield depth. You've got 5 guys outside of Markovich, who I think is more of a depth piece, but you've got 5 guys who could legitimately push for playing time. Unfortunately, only 4 spots with the DH.
Yeah, and you do wonder, too, if they maybe slide Cam Leary into first, too, as well. I mean, they have a lot of kind of vulnerability over there at first base. So, maybe one of those outfield guys slides over to first. But again, if you look at it, they have one of the more talented outfields in the ACC.
Oh, yeah. It's going to be interesting to see where Boston College, if they can build on their success from last season, it's going to come from the lineup. That's obviously their strength with who they return. I really, really actually like what they've built here offensively. It's just going to be a matter of their pitching, which I gave you a nice little easy transition for you.
Yeah, moving on to their pitching again. This is going to be probably their biggest question mark. They do return John West, the senior, had 17 appearances, started 13 games for him. Had a 4.50 ERA, but again, 71 strikeouts in 68 innings. That's the one that kind of jumps out to me. Eric Schroeder is again another right-handed pitcher. Had 24 appearances, started 3 games, 6-4, 5.37 ERA, 43 strikeouts, 62 innings. He was kind of their filler guy, and then Sean Hard is who we kind of project to be the Sunday guy. 10 appearances for him, really, really high ERA, right around that 10 mark. But again, only had 10 innings. How does he kind of handle the workload? And again, another thing that we don't have listed, but I think is a big one is, Joey Ryan, senior, 24 appearances, 5.57, 45 strikeouts in 32 innings. I think he's going to be a very, very big piece for this if he can kind of extend that out. Because again, that's always been Boston College's Achilles heel. It seems like, their walks are always up and they really kind of struggle to find the zone at times.
Yeah, it's a lot of the pressure is going to be on John West, who is an absolute stud. I think he's a tall man. He's going to be the ace. He's going to be the Friday night starter. He had an outstanding final regular season outing at Fenway Park last year, I believe, versus Notre Dame. Went 7 innings for Boston College as they went into the ACC tournament. In his final regular season start was absolutely sensational. So it's a big get to get him back. But behind him, we got a lot of question marks here. Nobody else on the roster had started more than 5 games in a season, and that's AJ Colarusso, who could be in the discussion to be a starter. But he had an 8.44 ERA last year, so I'm not sure what the new coaching staff is going to really focus on for these pitchers, because that could actually be the game changer, is a new coaching staff fixing certain things that might have been off with this group. All of a sudden, these guys could be having monster years. So we're not really sure what to expect from this Boston College pitching staff.
Tyler Mudd's kind of going to be the name that I circle. The Holy Cross transfer had 7 walks in 5 innings, really, really high ERA. He has kind of had the electric stuff we've seen with his spin rates in the past, but can he kind of take that next step? Because if you have those numbers where you're walking 7 guys in 5 innings, I mean, you're not going to get into the rotation at all. But he has electric stuff if he can find his way into that rotation.
Yeah, for me, it's going to be on Joey Ryan. He's going to be probably getting the first look at the closing position if he's not in the weekend rotation, which I don't expect him to be. Andrew Roman was the closer last year and was sensational for Boston College, which really helped. 2.93 ERA, 9 saves. Joey Ryan's going to have to take a step forward if he's going to take over that role and kind of keep things under control. I'd like to see a little bit less walks. I mean, it's not a huge amount of walks for, 12 walks in 32 innings, but I'd like to see that go a little bit lower. But he's the guy I'm looking at. And then, of course, Matthew Noonan, who's going to slide into Joey Ryan's old role as the setup guy. He's another guy that's going to get a lot of looks at high leverage. That 8.76 ERA needs to come down for Boston College to be successful.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to like about this Boston College staff, and there's a lot to kind of make you scratch your head and say, how is Boston College going to find outs again? The story of Boston College 2024 will be told by these guys on the screen pretty definitively. How they kind of handle everything will tell the tale of this one. Because again, as we kind of transition into the schedule, I mean, they have one of the better slates in kind of ACC. They open up at the MLB Desert Invitational, play a very, very talented Kansas State team in the second game. Then head to Arlington to play UT Arlington, play in the Richmond Invitational. And again, they draw Wake, they draw Clemson, they draw Louisville. And I believe Wake is probably going to be that Fenway Park game, either them or Louisville. I know that they kind of try and do it around that time. So maybe they can kind of get a little Fenway Park magic around those 2 series. But again, this Boston College, this is kind of a tough slate if you really kind of look up and down it.
Yeah, it's not easy. And of course, because of their northern team, they're going to play a lot of games on the road at first. Remember, I think February 28th at home. It'll be interesting to see if that game gets played up in Boston against Maine. But everything else, it's going to be fun there. And then MLB Classic. Then they're at Richmond, at VCU, at William Mary, visiting my wonderful state of Virginia before heading to North Carolina. So they've got it's going to be tough, those games, even though they're the better team, they're still having to go on the road to these smaller schools, and they're going to have to play well to win those games before they get into ACC play, even though, UNC Wilmington was a tournament team last year. That's not a team that you can just assume is a W. VCU is not an easy place to go play. So it's going to be tough to go in there and win those games on the road when they, to start the year. So it'll be interesting to see how things go for them. And then, of course, they've got tough non-conference schedule with Northeastern midweek, UConn midweek, who's always a tough game. So
I think that Northeastern midweek's tied to Beanpot too. So there's going to be kind of an extra adage for Northeastern to kind of go out as well. But again, drawing Northeastern out of Beanpot is again a really tough draw for Boston College.
Oh yeah, and they've got these 2 games against UConn as well, who's, like I said, is always a tough out. So I really liked they're pushing themselves in the non-conference schedule. They're kind of forced to, being a northern team, having to start the season on the road basically. But it's going to be interesting to see how they fare in ACC play with their pitching staff.
And another kind of note is their finals weekend. They did Maryland. I know a lot of teams in the past have done like Radford and smaller schools. They went out and found a quality opponent for their finals kind of bye in the ACC.
Yeah, and some teams don't even play that weekend. They want to make sure they focus on academics, and the ones that do play are, like you said, playing the smaller schools like Radford or somebody like that. They don't normally pick a Big Ten power like Maryland, who's going to be a tough out. for BC. It's going to be a fun season for Boston College. Maybe not as fun as last year. It's a lot more. They're not going to be able to sneak up on anybody, that's for sure.
Yeah, they're definitely going to be circled a lot, especially with this lineup. And again, before we kind of depart here, what's the floor and the ceiling that you see from this Boston College team?
So I see them at the floor. I feel like they could finish out missing the ACC tournament. I could see that. I don't think that's very likely given the lineup. I think they're going to do well enough to finish in the top 12. So I'm going to go ahead and say that their absolute floor for me is probably 12th. What about you?
I was going to say 10th. I think that their lineup kind of masks a lot of their pitching issues that they have. And I think they kind of sit in that, if in a nightmare scenario, they kind of get into a 10th. If a few teams kind of play up, I think that that's kind of where I see them. But I don't see them missing the ACC tournament.
No.
I see them a lot closer to almost being a regional host. I mean, they're going to have a chance to get some of these marquee wins. And I think they have a really good shot to kind of be in the mix like they were last year in kind of that, 16 to 25 range. That's where I kind of see this team.
Yeah, I could see them pushing for that. In that, I feel more probably in that 20 to 25 range if everything continues to go right like it did for them last year. I don't think they're going to quite be in that conversation for regional host. It's just such a tough schedule for them. So that's where I see them. Did we do Georgia Tech?
No, that was going to be kind of the transition pieces. Where do you see Georgia Tech in kind of their floor and ceiling?
Georgia Tech is a team that I see could push for a tournament appearance if everything goes well. It's just there's so many question marks that I could see going well that could put them that, but I could also see them missing the ACC tournament. They could be the number 13 team. There's a lot of question marks. I'm excited to see them because they're probably the team that I have the most questions about. That's just where I am on Georgia Tech.
Yeah, I know that we kind of hinted at it in our Pitt Notre Dame series that it's likely that these two teams don't finish 14th. I could see Georgia Tech having a nightmare scenario where a lot of their freshmen hit 220, 230, have a ton of growing pains in the ACC, and they fall into that 14th spot. But again, I think if a lot of these guys kind of play up to their talent levels, they could be, a 3 seed in a regional and give somebody really good fits. And I think if they can make a tournament, that's going to provide dividends for them as they are such a young team, and having that experience in a regional will pay dividends down the road.
Yeah, this freshman class, like you said, I think they're just as likely to go off as they are to go cold. So it's. I mean, Ryan Jaros and Burris. I really like those two guys. I think how they do is really going to dictate how the team does, and how the lineup does, because it's going to depend on the pitching, of course, too.
Monty, got any closing notes? Any bold predictions for these two teams?
No bold predictions. I'm just excited to get closer to the season. Every week we talk about two teams, and we talk about how excited we are, and I get more excited the more we talk about them. Next week we're doing Virginia and Virginia Tech. So we're going to get one of our big schools that a lot of us think is going to be a top 4, top 5 ACC team. And then, of course, we get Virginia Tech, who's always an interesting situation. So we're really diving into it. Only a couple more days to that one because we did this show a little late. So look forward to it. We'll have the graphics working next time. That was my bad. We'll be diving right into it.
I'm excited. I mean, these are two teams. Virginia Tech was a fringe tournament team 2 years ago. They were top 5 in the country. Virginia went to Omaha last year. I think these are going to be, and there's a ton of question marks for both of these teams again as well. So be soon to tune into that. That one's going to be Wednesday the 17th. Barring, there is kind of a snowstorm that's rolling through. So barring a snowstorm, we don't have internet, we should be able to be live that 17th.
Are you thinking you might have a snowstorm?
Yes, it's supposed to be like icy.
Oh man, your whole state shuts down if that happens.
I know, that's why I had to prepare for it.
Jake is from Texas, so if it snows, we won't see him for 2 months. They'll shut the whole power grid down.
I know, there's no internet.
Yeah,
So if we're not live on Wednesday, you know that it's because my internet was just non-existent.
Yep.
Thanks again for tuning in.
Yeah, otherwise we'll be there.
Yes. Thanks again, once again, for tuning in. Be sure to watch our one from Pitt and Notre Dame. Monty, this has been the Georgia Tech and Boston College preview. See you next week.
See ya.